KBLA Talk 1580. And it is time for Freedmen Friday. We do this every week at this hour. It is our dedication to the reparations cause, the reparations issue. We have been doing it over 2 years. We focus on all different aspects, all different organizations, factions, philosophies, theories. We go from coast to coast. We've talked to people from commissions. We've talked to economists. We've spoken with activists on the ground, lawmakers, and we will keep this going because we need to know more about reparations. We need to be abreast of what is happening, and we need to be part of the momentum. That is why we're doing this. I'm excited to bring another voice we haven't heard into the conversation. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She holds academic affiliations with the Center for African Studies, the Center for Indigenous Studies Research Theme, and the Genomic Security and Privacy Research Theme. Dr. LaKisha, David, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. You're also a principal investigator at something called the African Kinship Reunion Project. Speak on that.
Right.
What is that?
All right. Well, this is the broad research program where I ultimately am pursuing the question that descendants of families that were separated during mass human trafficking from Africa, known as the Transatlantic Slave Trade, that these families are reuniting using autosomal genetic genealogy and trying to understand the social implications of that too. So what meanings do people associate with the results? I tend to focus on where descendants of Africans are finding living African relatives on the continent using the test. So understanding the social implications of that, as well as, what do Ghanaians think of it, right? And so I do go to Ghana from time to time and collect saliva samples there so that they're part of the pool where we're finding relatives. So the African Kinship Reunion is, in a nutshell, we're looking at the family trees, the genetics, how to do this better, and what do people make of it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was looking at when I was reading about you and your work, well, let's backtrack a little. You're an interesting scholar, from what I can tell, just as a person, but also an interesting scholar in the sense that you bring together what we would normally think as historical or sociological aspects along with the scientific piece, which is, DNA technology. Talk to me about how your studies and your unique background bring these two things together.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. Let me start by saying I think both of it, the social science as well as the genetics, they're both science, right?
Yeah.
And so, I don't, and I guess, by necessity, they are both sciences. And so that's the way I look at it. So my training was in the human development and family studies. That's my PhD. And so that's where I had the opportunity to focus on the social implications. So, the meaning making, the theories about families and things like that. Was also able to focus on the social and ethical applications of genetics in the postdoc program. So this is like my formal training, but I'm also African American, and along the way, I was also doing my genealogy, and I found where people were talking about finding living relatives, and so I was just at a point in time where I could also integrate the genetics training into my work, and so it is just motivated by, I guess, the firsthand experience with it, and also seeing others talk about what it means when they're finding African relatives, that sort of motivated me to pull these different, pieces, these different sciences, these different methods together towards the ultimate goal of building a better tree and understanding how people make meaning with it.
Yeah, I mean that's a very scholarly way of putting it. How people, how people process that. It's varied and various. But you're focusing on people finding living relatives on the continent, living relatives that they can actually trace their specific DNA to, right? Rather than a sort of broad area, like a lot of times when people take consumer level DNA tests, it'll say you have you're 12% German and 34% Sierra Leonean or something like that. They're broad statements. They're not actually targeting individuals.
Right, and that is one of the first things that I want people to understand. Talking about a different thing now. And to be fair, the commercial companies, Ancestry 23andMe and so forth, they offer those broad results, but they also offer the one-to-one relatedness, those lists of relatives, that people will find, and many people don't know who they are on their relatives list. So these commercial companies are also producing the same type of results. It's just that in my research, that's the part that I focus on. So yes, we are talking about finding living relatives, a person of African descent, African American, Jamaican, so forth, finding a living, relative on the continent that they can literally call and ask and talk, about their family history.
What about the
That's
idea?
fascinating.
I'm sorry. What about the idea of finding? I mean, we do focus a lot on our deceased ancestors because there's this huge
Hmm.
gap for African Americans. The Yoruba say if you can't name 9 generations of your ancestors going back, you cannot be considered mentally stable, which means most African Americans, by that definition, right, would not be mentally stable. What about those in between relatives? You know what I mean? The ones between the ones we know, the ones that are at the family reunion, and the ones in Africa. And of course, I'm pointing to that question because this is Freedmen Friday, where we talk a lot about reparations, and I do know
Hmm.
some people who have been able to trace their relative to a particular slave ship or a particular enslaved U.S. Black ancestor, enslaved or freed or somewhere in between. And I'm wondering, when you talk about the increasing sophistication of these DNA tests, um, what what you think of that?
Okay. What I think about is that DNA is DNA, and so whereas my particular focus in the African Kinship Reunion are those African diaspora connections, I'm still finding the other relatedness as well. And so I'm right now I'm referring to like my database, but like also in Ancestry and also in the other, databases. Yeah, people are finding relatives where you're recovering family histories through the, various slave eras. I mean, it's the DNA is there. So what do I think of it? I think that it should be used as one of the primary tools, not a secondary tool when you're trying to prove lineages because for most people, either the records are not there or they're not easily accessible. And this is not to say that there aren't successes and that the records aren't there, altogether. But, by and large, even if like one or two people or, a few people find the lineage from a person who was living like before 1870 or something like that, the DNA and having like sound evidence that you actually descend from the same ancestor, even if you wanted to rely on the paperwork, on the documentation and things like that, once one person does that, and then you can also prove that you descend from that same ancestor, then that opens it up for many, many, many people to also benefit, in the reparations movement, any type of reparations benefit from the labor of that one person who was able to, just happen to be able to trace it through other documentations. Because you can't lie in the DNA. You might misinterpret it, but the DNA is still there. So I think that it should be used as a primary tool in as a to prove a tool to prove lineage, to prove descent, but also in of itself, recovering that family history, both in whether it's U.S. or diasporic location or to the continent.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm reading about the Charleston Reparations Task Force, which is part of the Black Lives Matter grassroots Charleston branch. They've actually they're actually taking an action demanding the transfer of 7,000 acres of plantation land, including Middleton Place, Boone Hall, and Magnolia Plantation, former plantation land, to transfer it over to Gullah Geechee people. And to me, this seems like they've given them 40 days, an ultimatum to plantation owners to hand the land over. And I think it's a dope concept. The chapter lead there, Marcus McDonald, is making a stand. Hope to talk with him on this show soon. But I'm bringing it up to you because this seems like a place where a very specific DNA tracing could bolster their case, their argument for reparations. Mr. McDonald himself says that he is a direct descendant of those that were enslaved on those particular plantations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, I'm not familiar with that particular case, but, in general, again, I support it. So, like in my own case, I guess I use my family history. My fourth great grandparent was Tamar, and she was enslaved to Samuel Glass and Mary LaCroix in central Louisiana. And I know this because of documents, because they're written in wills, they're written in an actual, unfortunately in the state sale. So I have these various documents, but where I can actually point, I actually have a receipt of the sale, of my ancestor.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is. It is. Lots of mixed emotions. Happy to see them, but then see their names, but it's a receipt for her sale. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's crazy. I don't know how your whole body and soul must have responded when you saw that first time.
Yeah, and then so they had a 10-year battle, and Tamar actually took them to court for her freedom. She lost, but in that it created these court documents, and when they lost the case, they were so, because by then it was several family members, 1/3 down, 1/3 once a year until it was paid off, 8% annual interest. And for some reason, it's that 8% that just really, they were furniture. So processing this is hard. But our history isn't just the survival of people who were enslaved in the U.S. or other diasporic locations. We were taken from families and communities and economies and universities and so forth in Africa, right? Mm-hmm. And so what the DNA is able to do is not only help us to recover those missing details of our family life histories in the U.S. to say this family stole my family's labor, but we also are able to recover somewhat of a sense of dignity that says but my family came from this place, they were living life, and then a tragic thing happened.
Yeah, that's powerful. Dr. LaKisha David is our guest. It's a Freedmen Friday. We'll continue the conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
She's reclaiming her time on KBLA Talk 1580. More First Things First with Dominique DePrima when we come forward.
Hi, I'm Zoe Williams, host of The Voice of Reason, weeknights at 7 p.m. here on KBLA Talk 1580, with a personal invitation for you to join me and Insight.me as we present The Healing Box, live at Inglewood's world-famous Miracle Theater, Saturday evening, May 23rd at 7 p.m. Look, I understand your attachment style has been running your life like a rogue algorithm, and nobody has had the courage to press pause. Until now, Dr. Bakoya McCall and yours truly are curating a night where clinicians, spiritualists, and an all-star panel of Black woman healers like Dr. Shalonda Sunshine Crawford, Dr. Jashana Johnson, and spiritualist Precious McGill will join some amazing spoken word artists and the legendary comedian Louis Dix to diagnose, disrupt, and heal your relational wreckage in real time. Listen, bring your trauma. As a matter of fact, bring your baby mama. No, bring your testimony. And if you're still texting your ex at 2 a.m., baby, you're not just invited, you're the target demo. Tickets are moving fast, so grab yours at themiracleinglewood.com before your dating history gets flagged as a pre-existing condition. That's themiracleinglewood.com. We'll see you there Saturday, May 23rd at 7 p.m.
Wesley Financial Group is not a law firm.
Ask yourself this question. Is it really worth holding on to that timeshare that you know you need to get rid of? Here's the truth. The average maintenance fee just went up over 17%. That could have been 117%, and there's nothing you can do about it. When you buy a timeshare, you give them a blank check for annual maintenance and assessment fees. I'm Chuck McDowell, founder of Wesley Financial Group. For 15 years, I've helped over 50,000 families cancel their timeshare. Not sell it, not transfer it, cancel it. Did you buy a timeshare because they told you it was a great investment and your maintenance fees would never go up? That's a lie. Are you ready to get rid of your timeshare once and for all? Simply call us and I'll send you our timeshare exit kit that explains all your options for cancellation.
Call Wesley now for your timeshare exit kit. 800-242-1551. That's 800-242-1551. 800-242-1551.
The conversation continues right now with Dominique DePrima on First Things First.
It's a Freedmen Friday where we really look at all different aspects of reparation. As Molly Bell always says, straight out of Compton, reparation means repair. And we're talking with Dr. LaKisha David, Principal Investigator of the African Kinship Reunion Project. A couple things that jumped out at me just reading about you. One of them is I wasn't really thinking about or tracking or imagining how much the DNA technology is advancing or how much it could potentially advance. And what that might mean for our investigations of our family ties in Africa, in the United States, in the diaspora.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and, one of the things I emphasize, too, is just how recent this history is. And so we have this, the technology that's improving. We're able to get more refined results. So as you mentioned earlier, we're not just talking about a possible membership into a multi-person ethnic group. We're talking about, individual family groups, able to identify individual relatives. Yeah, and that's where we're at. But it's part because the history isn't that long ago. So I like to explain it this way, that if you're looking at the slave voyage database, right, a reputable database, slavevoyage.org, we know that the last documented ship from Africa to a diasporic location was in 1866. Okay, 1866. A person born today, and if you look at it, one generation being about 25 years, so a person born today, that last ship arrived 7 generations ago. Right, 7 generations ago. But for a person that was born in 1960, that was only about 4 generations ago. We're not even talking about the end of slavery itself, which is about the same time. But that the last where people are still being trafficked, only 4 generations ago, this is, relatively speaking, recent history. And so this is why, like, the recovery, using the technology that we have, and yes, it is advancing, but using the technology we have and scientists asking the question, we're able to find and recover some of this history. So whereas our community narrative used to be, oh, our separation was so long ago, we won't be able to find the families, that's just simply not true. It's not true. We are finding living relatives.
That's wild. Okay, so just to follow up on this idea, how much of a difference could we see in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years in terms of the technology of DNA tracing and what it might reveal for Black people, for anybody, but specifically for descendants of enslaved folks, wherever they are, wherever we are? We've lost Dr. LaKisha David. Hopefully we'll get her back on the phone momentarily, because this is something that made me really think about, the possibilities as we go from more vague to more specific. What might we find out, not just about ourselves, but about various historical figures, and these constant rumors, right, about who's Black and who's not and who's descended from what. And I've heard a lot of people discrediting the DNA tests that folks take for those general regions, but at the same time, it doesn't get discredited in court. So how much of a trajectory are we talking about in the next 5, 10, 15 years in terms of improvement, and what kinds of things might we be able to, reveal that we are not able to specifically verify at this point?
Could you repeat the last question? I didn't hear all of the questions.
Okay, so looking at your work, I'm seeing that there's pretty rapid advancement going on in all science. And so with the advancements that we are likely to see in the next 5, 10, 15 years in the DNA technology, what are we likely to become able to figure out or know provably that we haven't been able to in the past?
I think the focus is going to be more in inferring these family trees. So being able to look just at the DNA, and maybe some basic information about the family history, but being able to look at a group of people who were, provided their DNA and infer or estimate how they're related to each other across the last 20 or so generations. That is phenomenal. The thing about it, though, is that these advancements are really being pushed in the forensics side of things. So we're looking at forensic investigative genetic genealogy and FBI agents who are now, genealogists, because of, like you said, you could use it in court. We could deny it amongst ourselves, but somebody is paying attention. And so, unfortunately, but we can move it, to recovery as well. So forensics isn't just about law enforcement. So where I see it going is being able to tell a more refined history, generation by generation, across the last 20 generations using the DNA.
That's amazing. I want to get deeper into what you're saying about connecting people through DNA to living relatives in Africa, which is also quite wild. We only have a minute here until news, traffic, and sports. We'll talk more about it on the other side. But just tee this up for me. I mean, maybe you can give me one example of what you're talking about.
I am talking about, for example, Sherry Williams, who lives in Chicago, an African-American woman for generations, family in the U.S., finding a living relative who is from Ghana, but also living in the suburbs of Chicago, them meeting each other, Ernest is his name, meeting each other and figuring out what that connection means to them. So, foods, dance, conversations, calls on the birthdays, that recovery, that repair, that's what we're talking about, cousin relationships. And we could talk about, it more. But, think about it as you're related to your biological parents, you're related to your biological first and second cousins, and we're also related to our African cousins more distantly.
Wow, that's wild. Okay, we're talking with Dr. LaKisha. David, it's a Freedmen Friday, and you're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
You can't fix what you won't face.
And we face it every day.
This is KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Bree Wood with BIN News Now. Black Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass says President Trump is a key partner in rebuilding after recent wildfires.
What we needed most from the president was his advocacy around the insurance industry and the banking industry.
Bass discussed the issue following a White House visit as frustration grows over insurance delays. Atlanta Falcons defender James Pierce Jr. is entering a 6-month pretrial intervention program tied to a February incident in Florida. Prosecutors say the move could dismiss felony charges if conditions are met, while the NFL says it's monitoring the case under its conduct policy. And Nicki Minaj is set to attend this year's White House Correspondents' Dinner. The rapper will appear as a guest of Fox News after previously backing President Trump at a Turning Point USA gathering and calling herself his #1 fan. Get BIN News Now on demand 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.
Think It Up is an initiative to activate student-powered, teacher-led learning projects. Students and teachers, how can you spark great learning experiences in your classrooms today? Join at thinkitup.org.
Is this the time? This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Rams made it clear they want to get an early start on preparing for their future at quarterback. With the number 13 pick in the NFL draft, the Rams selected Alabama quarterback Ty Simpson, a player many draft experts did not project to go in the first round. Matthew Stafford was NFL MVP last season, but he turned 38 in February. The Rams know Stafford is nearing the end of a Hall of Fame career. In 15 starts at Alabama, Simpson threw 28 touchdown passes and completed 64% of his pass attempts. The Chargers used their first-round pick, number 22, on defensive end Akeem Mesidor of Miami. Mesidor led the Hurricanes with 12.5 sacks and 17 tackles for a loss. Apparently, the oddsmakers in Vegas have no respect for the Lakers. Despite trailing the Lakers 0-2 in the playoffs, the Houston Rockets are 8.5-point favorites to win Game 3 tonight in Houston. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
Lots of places can expose you to identity theft.
Oh no.
That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity, which is way more than anyone can do on their own. If we find anything suspicious, like new loans or changes to your financial accounts, we alert you right away, all through text, phone, email, or the LifeLock app. Get the alerts that could make all the difference. Save up to 40% your first year with promo code NEWS at LifeLock.com. Terms apply.
There's a lot of uncertainty in the world right now. Things are changing fast and no one knows what comes next. Times like these make you realize just how important it is to be prepared. That's where My Patriot Supply comes in. They're America's #1 most trusted resource for survival food, solar power, water filtration systems, and more. Go to preparewithamerica.com to unlock a special offer that'll help you get ready for whatever comes our way. Go to preparewithamerica.com to see the special offer right now. That's preparewithamerica.com.
Turn the dial to where the truth lives. This is KBLA Talk 1580.
My name is Cynthia Mitchell. I've been an emergency room nurse in Los Angeles County for 25 years. I've been there through every fire season, every outbreak, every earthquake. Every time Los Angeles needed us, the doctors and nurses of Los Angeles County showed up. And right now, I'm seeing another disaster coming. Trump's cuts to Los Angeles County's healthcare system are a public health crisis in the making. Medi-Cal, public hospitals, disaster preparedness are all at risk. But we can stop it. Measure ER fights back against these cuts. For a half a penny, we keep emergency rooms open, care within reach for working families, and doctors and nurses serving the communities we love. When you vote yes on Measure ER, you're not just voting for health care, you're voting for LA. Vote yes on Measure ER by June 2nd.
Ad paid for by Yes on ER, Restore Healthcare for Angelinos, sponsored by St. John's Community Health and Health Justice Action Fund. Ad committee top funder, St. John's Community Health.
The joint will be jumping. Ebony Repertory Theater, in association with Fig Street Films, brings you one of the most beloved musicals of all time. Tony Award winner, Ain't Misbehavin'. The soulful, swinging celebration of the music of Fats Waller. From the rollicking to the romantic, this show is pure magic, full of the songs that defined an era and the voices that'll make you forget everything else for a night. Foot stomping, heart stirring, unforgettable. Don't miss Ain't Misbehavin' at the Nate Holden Performing Arts Center, starring Lettucey, directed by Ren T. Brown. This is the night out you've been waiting for. Tickets are going fast, so don't wait. Grab yours now at ebonyrep.org or call the box office today at 323-964-9766. Ebony Repertory Theater, bringing the culture, keeping the legacy alive.
Ain't Misbehavin' runs May 21st through June 8th at the Nate Holden Performing Arts Center. Get your tickets now.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where everybody is somebody and nobody is a stranger. You belong here.
You belong here indeed, and I'm glad you are here. It's a Freedmen Friday. This is where we pay attention to reparations, no matter what administration, no matter what climate, no matter what organization. Dr. LaKisha David is our guest, and she's taking us on a really interesting journey. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. She's also the lead investigator for the African Kinship Reunion Project. You talked about Sherry Williams from Chicago, who through DNA found a relative, a Ghanaian person who had migrated to Chicago, but Sherry her family had been in this country for generations, right? They're descendants of enslaved persons. They're not
That's right.
immigrants from Ghana.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
And the DNA linked her with immigrants from Ghana that just so happened to be living in the same city.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What was her reaction? What was the reaction of the family? How did that upend everybody's lives and worldviews?
Well, I love that story. And there's another one that I'll share in a moment. As far as like, what does it mean? What does it look like? But yeah, so I think it was, Ernest participated in the project. It was just like early versions of the project. Ernest, the person from Ghana, tested and, part of the project. I believe it was Sherry who contacted me maybe, or maybe because I sent some emails out to some of the closer matches. And, however way it happened, they connected, and then once they connect, it's on them to do what they will with the information. And so, when I later caught up with them, they were telling me about, food and, meeting the parents and things like that. So, of course you want to know more. I mean, you get this one question answered, but it just opens, many more questions, right? So they continue to test to see, okay, so then how are they related? Because at this point, it's not if, but how.
Right.
So they continue to test. We got Ernest to test, I think it was his mother, and it turns out that Sherry is related to Ernest through his father. I believe that's how that one works. So yeah, it's a lot of stuff going on here. So once people test one time, they end up continuing with the test to build on the story, to build on the narrative. When they test these additional times, that's additional evidence showing that they're related. So we know that if Ernest and Sherry are truly related, then by necessity, at least one of their parents would be related, to the cousin, right?
Right.
And so, that's what we're finding. So in their case, Sherry is related through Ernest's father. So it's just, continuing to build that layer of evidence. But yeah, so like she's talking about taking like trays of food, and things like that. So it's really interesting to hear her and to see, pictures and things like that. But I want to share another story.
Okay, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So it was this one guy, let's call him Marcus. And Marcus, he had very dark skin. And so growing up, his family would pick on him. So he would experience racism, out in the world, but also at home, there was colorism. And he said that he just hated looking at himself in the mirror to the point where he avoided looking at himself in the mirror, right? So he grew up, he, joined gangs and things like that. At some point in his life, he started to look at African history. And from that, he says that he learned that schools lied to him, and he's, developing a sense of pride in his African heritage because of the work that he's doing, studying African history. Eventually, he took a DNA test, and that is how he was linked to another person in my project who was from Ghana. They met in California. So they wasn't necessarily like live near each other, but they just, they were able to meet in California. And then they sent that picture. They shared that picture. And then if you can see, the expressions on his face, the picture speaks, just to give, 1,000 words, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he says that now he loves looking at himself in the mirror. He says that he can, is that the Nigerian side? Is that the Senegalese side? So like it's transformative. It's transformative. And even if it's like, okay, well, it's not a big deal, I'm American, whatever, all these things. But then once it's in your life, it can be transformative.
Yeah, I don't want to go too deep down this road, but I want to at least touch on it. I mean, there are people in this country, particularly in the reparations space, that feel that we're not related to Africans. And it's not just reparations space. There are some philosophical folks. And we know that there were black people here that came before Columbus. We know that there were black people here in the North American and South American continents that were not brought here that predate enslavement. But have you had any kind of philosophical interaction with folks who don't want to connect ourselves to Africa at all, and how this DNA would kind of refute that in many ways?
Yeah, okay. Not directly, but they will make TikTok videos. So, about how this is, fraud and things like that. Okay. I honestly think that is a mixture of not understanding the histories of Africa, not knowing the civilizations in Africa and things like that. So a part of it is wanting to distance themselves from something that has been denigrated, which is a colonial mindset, which is ironic. Yeah, people, we know that people from Africa travel, across the world in here, but the volume, it's kind of almost the same argument, but the volume of people who traveled before the mass human trafficking, by around 12 million or so people, it just doesn't compare. Most people, were trafficked, or descendants of people who were trafficked. And I think also, so part of it is the wanting to be associated with something that you feel you can have pride in. And it's ironic that I'm accused sometimes of being against reparations when it is saying, well, this is the very thing to use to prove, descent, even when you don't have the documentation. The other thing is that not understanding the DNA test. there are some valid arguments against what you can refer to as ethnicity estimates in the first sort of versions of the test that was coming out. And I think a lot of the arguments that's used today, they're still arguments that's based off of a technology and sort of mixing a little bit of understanding with a whole lot of misunderstanding.
Okay, to that point, go ahead.
Yeah. I just want to say one small thing is that, as I mentioned before, you'll share about 12.5% of your DNA with a first cousin. If I remember the percentages correctly. And so you have, so you share about half of that with a second cousin. You sharing a measurable amount of DNA with a third cousin and so forth. It's the same philosophy. It's the same, philosophy. It's the same, principles. It is not just an invention. So that one-to-one relatedness. If you happen to, share that significant amount of DNA with an African person, the question is not if you're related, but how. And we're using, what we understand to estimate that distance, to estimate how long ago your shared ancestor lived. And we're showing it that is from 4 to 20 generations ago from present day. That can't be disputed. It's just there. So go ahead. What you're saying.
Well, I was going to say to that point, I mean, we talk about DNA. I was about to take one of the commercial tests because I work with an organization called African Focus Inc. In fact, we're doing our annual gala on Saturday, and one of the things they do is they have African families adopting African American families as a means of healing the wounds, helping to heal the wounds of enslavement. It's an organization that brings African Americans and Africans together. We're bringing a king from the Yoruba land this year. There's different kings and chiefs and queens and stuff that come. Anyway, the point is I was going to do the DNA test, as many of the folks in that organization do. But then I started thinking about the feds and, people taking your DNA and using it for the wrong reasons and hijacking it, from Henrietta Lacks to 23andMe folding and sort of selling off people's genetic material. And I wonder if you could speak on the genetic security. I know the ethics piece is part of your expertise, and also what you would say to people like me who said, I don't know about that because of those reasons.
First let me say that, actually let me back up a little bit. You mentioned the Africa focus. I think, I don't want to misrepresent, but State Representative Carol Ammons, the 103rd District of Illinois, who helped champion part of this work, and by champion I mean was able to help secure $500,000 for people in the state of Illinois to participate in this project for free, to be able to do the DNA testing, and maybe some will find living relatives in Ghana. And I think using that same program where the chiefs and helping that connection. If I'm not misrepresenting, but anyway. I would say that those arguments about security are valid. You mentioned Henrietta Lacks. We know this history, and I will first of all not gaslight you, to say that that's not a valid concern. It is a valid concern, but I will say that most of the commercial companies do not work directly with law enforcement. I think there's one Family Tree. Family Tree DNA, I think they work directly with law enforcement in that way. But the other major ones don't. Where you're seeing these cold cases being solved, they are through a few platforms. One of them being GEDmatch, like the Golden State Killer was found through GEDmatch. So I'm not saying I'm a killer or that I have a criminal record, but these folks I don't want them doing anything with my genetic matter, my DNA. Yeah, that's where I'm getting to that. So if you are using, it just depends on the company, is what I'm saying. So, like, if you with Ancestry, for example, or 23andMe, they hardly, share their DNA with law enforcement. And what I mean is, you have to have a very strong warrant to see anything. And even when you do have a warrant, it's not looking at the entire database. It's very, very targeted. And at least Ancestry, I know for sure, reports the number of warrants that they end up serving. And it is a surprisingly low number. So it gets reported. It's a very low number. I feel comfortable using not that I'm giving a commercial for them, but it does look like they're very conservative.
Right. And your database, the one that you have as a scientist, is specific to this project, and you have right, and so that's even more secure because you're not releasing it publicly at all. But it includes DNA material, genetic material from the United States and from Africa. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes.
And so,
yeah.
So does that mean
you're not being shared?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, it's fine.
Well, it's not being shared with other researchers as well. Beyond my team. That's all.
I see. So then, do you get DNA material from some of these what they call castles, are really dungeons, slave sites throughout Africa? I know you mentioned Ghana a couple times. Is that part of the process? Because it would seem like that would be a great source.
No, I thought about that. That comes with some other considerations, but in the future, for example, where I'm sampling living people in northern Ghana, where the Picoro slave camp was at. There's also mass graves there where I want to help to identify them, considering it. So, in the future, yes, but right now it's a focus on living people.
Got it. We are, I don't know about you, but this is raising lots of questions and conversations with myself that I never had before, and that's always a good thing. Dr. LaKisha David is our guest. It's a Freedmen Friday. We're always talking reparations on KBLA Talk 1580.
More of First Things First with Dominique DePrima when we come forward.
You better work.
She's rooted in culture and rising in power. Los Angeles City Council member Karen D. Price Jr. invites you to the District 9 Women's Leadership Summit, a powerful gathering celebrating the women who shape our communities. Join us Sunday, May 3rd from 1 to 6 p.m. Registration is open now, but space is limited. District 9 residents receive special priority. This event is free. Call 323-846-2651 to reserve your spot. That's 323-846-2651. Be rooted, be powerful, be there.
Getting around LA doesn't have to cost a lot. Metro has fares that fit every budget. 20 free rides for qualified riders through the Life Fare program. Free passes for students with GoPass and affordable options for everyone in between. Wherever you're going, Metro's got you covered. Visit metro.net/fare programs.
Hi, I'm Fred Martin, founder of Compton Kids Club. I just want to talk about the authenticity and tell y'all about my homeboy, Tom Steyer. Tom is a rock star. When I met him, Tom gave a grant to schools in San Francisco. All the kids were on probation, and we were flying instructors for 2 years to come and help those kids doing performing arts and turning their life around. Some of the kids that he supported, they've graduated from UCLA. Let's fast forward. Tom is in schools in Compton, hanging out with the kids in the piano classes. Brother Tom Steyer hangs out in the studio with us. These are the seeds that he's planted. This has nothing to do with elections. What's coming out of his mouth is not a campaign speech. It's authentic, and when he say he walks away from a business because he want to do his values, he ain't making that up because he's running for governor. This man is real.
Ad paid for by Steyer for Governor 2026.
Hear that? That's the sound of your life. Perfectly imperfect. Beating in rhythm to the world you've created. but every time you drive after drinking, the music gets drowned out. Your life sounds pretty great. Don't let a buzz ruin it. Buzz driving is drunk driving. Don't drive buzzed. A message from NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Broadcasting live from Leimert Park, USA. Welcome back to your home for unapologetically progressive radio, KBLA Talk 1580.
An exciting morning around here. Really, really looking forward to the conversation with filmmaker, an artistic giant, a writer, producer, pioneering filmmaker Charles Burnett. He'll be joining me in studio next hour. Right now it is Freedmen Friday. Dr. LaKisha David is my guest, and she's doing some work you may not be familiar with. She's a principal investigator of the African Kinship Reunion Project. When you talk big picture, Dr. David, what is your goal for this project?
I see that this becoming a normal thing where random person of African descent are able to recall their family history, and it just changes, how they envision the future beyond just the way that the U.S. defines them, to can see themselves on a international, transnational family, supports where you're getting that sense of self from beyond just the U.S. and having that, that repair be a normal thing. So people have been able to have a more cohesive family narrative for people of African descent, And to learn more about the project, the website is www.takir.org. And if there's other stories out there, I would love to hear them as well.
TAKIR, Takir.org. Yeah, it's there's so much there. When we talk about reparations, many times on this show we talk about the check, and I think that's super important. The check and other harms, not just enslavement, but also the subsequent harms of Jim Crow and all of the badges of our enslavement. But repair also means spiritual, mental health, physical, trauma, recovery. So how do you see this kind of investigation, this kind of reconnection playing a role in repair?
I see it when a 90-year-old person, a 90-plus-year-old person makes it out to the events because this is important to her and this is what, something that she's been wanting. So like in East St. Louis, for example, in Illinois, we'll do events and we'll talk about the program. And, when our elders are making their way, out to these events, it is seeking repair. And I think about, the lives that they live, and there wasn't community-based trauma, recovery programs for them.
There sure weren't.
Right?
There sure weren't. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so this, I see it as that. At least something.
So when you talk about HR 453 in Illinois, that was the legislation you reference, right? That's meant to give people access to this data, this testing for themselves and their families. Do you see that spreading?
I do. So someone from a group from Michigan reached out. I think New York was interested. So yeah, you mean in terms of across the nation, right?
Yeah.
I do. I think it's going to become a normal thing once people hear about it.
Yeah. Well, California's probably next. We like to stay on the cutting edge when it comes to reparations, repair in all of its aspects. We've got a minute here, Dr. LaKisha David. What do you want to leave us with?
That is possible. That this is a real thing. This is science, based off of science. Every much as you're biologically related to any other cousin, we are biologically related to distant cousins on the African continent as well. So that this is possible, that this type of repair, not only proven descent for reparations in that legal term, but also that sense of self, dignity, having a more cohesive family narrative, that this is a real thing that's happening and it's very, very possible and doable.
Crazy thing is, I mean, in the future, just I know from my travels in Africa, we could have something similar. You could be finding relatives throughout the so-called Middle East, right? Wherever Africa's children are. Brazil,
right.
I mean, because when you look at the structure of those so-called Middle Eastern families, the enslaved woman was kept enslaved, but her offspring were actually incorporated into those families. Unlike here, they did not remain enslaved. They were claimed as children. So ain't no telling who you might be related to in this globe. And it's pretty, the implications are pretty astounding, actually.
Yeah, right? Right, yeah.
Well, Dr. LaKisha David, thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for spending the hour with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah.
If you missed this one or any of them, just look on YouTube. All our shows are there, and they're also wherever you get your pods. Director Charles Burnett is next, and you're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Bree Wood with BIN News Now. Black Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass says President Trump is a key partner in rebuilding after recent wildfires.
What we needed most from the president was his advocacy around the insurance industry and the banking industry.
Bass discussed the issue following a White House visit as frustration grows over insurance delays. Atlanta Falcons defender James Pierce Jr. is entering a 6-month pretrial intervention program tied to a February incident in Florida. Prosecutors say the move could dismiss felony charges if conditions are met, while the NFL says it's monitoring the case under its conduct policy. And Nicki Minaj is set to attend this year's White House Correspondents' Dinner. The rapper will appear as a guest of Fox News after previously backing President Trump at a Turning Point USA gathering and calling herself his #1 fan. Get BIN News Now on demand 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.
Think It Up is an initiative to activate student-powered, teacher-led learning projects. Students and teachers, how can you spark great learning experiences in your classrooms today? Join at thinkitup.org.
Is this the time? This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Rams made it clear they want to get an early start on preparing for their future at quarterback. With the number 13 pick in the NFL draft, the Rams selected Alabama quarterback Ty Simpson, a player many draft experts did not project to go in the first round. Matthew Stafford was NFL MVP last season, but he turned 38 in February. The Rams know Stafford is nearing the end of a Hall of Fame career. In 15 starts at Alabama, Simpson threw 28 touchdown passes and completed 64% of his pass attempts. The Chargers used their first-round pick, number 22, on defensive end Akeem Mesidor of Miami. Mesidor led the Hurricanes with 12.5 sacks and 17 tackles for a loss. Apparently, the oddsmakers in Vegas have no respect for the Lakers. Despite trailing the Lakers 0-2 in the playoffs, the Houston Rockets are 8.5-point favorites to win Game 3 tonight in Houston. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
In a world full of noise, one station keeps it real. KBLA Talk 1580, where the conversation goes deeper, the voices sound like yours, and the issues that matter most to our community take center stage. Progressive, powerful, unapologetically us. Whether you're driving through the city or tuning in from your home or office, join the public square. KBLA Talk 1580, your home for talk that enlightens, encourages,